The silence at gate B12 wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that comes right before a storm. 60 people froze, phones raised, cameras recording, as the gate agent tossed the woman's platinum boarding pass onto the floor like it was trash. "I don't care who you think you are," he sneered, his voice echoing in the terminal. "First class is for valued customers, not for people who look like you. Step aside or I'm calling security." He thought he was protecting the airline's image. He didn't realize that the woman in the hoodie standing calmly before him didn't just buy the ticket. She had just bought the entire airline. And the ID she was about to pull from her pocket wasn't a driver's license. It was a death sentence for his career. The rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of JFK International Airport, turning the tarmac into a blurry watercolor of grey steel and flashing orange lights. Inside Terminal 4, the air was thick with the scent of roasted coffee, expensive perfume, and the stress of 1,000 delayed passengers. Dr. Evelyn Vance adjusted the hood of her oversized charcoal grey sweatshirt. It was comfortable, vintage, and frayed at the cuffs, a relic from her days at MIT. To the casual observer, Evelyn looked like a tired graduate student, or perhaps a weary traveler who had just rolled out of bed. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her sweatpants were tucked into worn-out sneakers. She clutched a leather tote bag close to her chest, her eyes scanning the departure board. Flight 882 to Zurich. Status: on time. Evelyn let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 6 months. This wasn't a vacation. It was the culmination of the most grueling negotiation of her life. As the founder and CEO of Vance Dynamics, a shadowy but immensely powerful firm specializing in aerospace logistics and distressed asset acquisition, she had spent the last half-year in boardrooms filled with shouting men in Italian suits. She was tired. She was wealthy beyond the comprehension of most people in the terminal. But right now, she just wanted to sleep. She approached the check-in counter for Stratford Airways. Stratford was a legacy carrier, once the crown jewel of aviation, now a bloated giant struggling with debt and a reputation for terrible customer service. Evelyn knew this better than anyone. She knew their profit margins, their liability insurance caps, and the names of their secret offshore shell companies. She knew it all because, as of 9 a.m. that morning, her signature was the only thing keeping them from bankruptcy. But nobody at the airport knew that yet. The press release was scheduled for tomorrow. She bypassed the snaking line of economy passengers, ignoring the grumbles of exhausted travelers, and stepped onto the plush red carpet of the priority first class lane. The lane was empty, save for a man in a sharp blue blazer standing behind the podium, typing furiously on a computer. His name tag read Greg. He was perfectly groomed, with hair gelled into a rigid wave and a jawline that suggested he spent more time in front of a mirror than doing his job. Evelyn walked up to the podium. "Good morning," she said softly, offering a polite smile. Greg didn't look up. He kept typing. "Economy check-in is at the kiosks behind you, ma'am. This lane is for priority members only." Evelyn blinked. She was used to being underestimated. In fact, she often used it as a tactical advantage in business, but the dismissal in his tone was sharp. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "I'm flying first class." Greg finally stopped typing. He looked up, his eyes traveling slowly from her messy bun, down her oversized hoodie, to her sneakers. He let out a short, derisive scoff, a sound that was barely a laugh, but carried the weight of 1,000 judgments. "Check your ticket again, sweetie," Greg said, his voice dripping with faux pity. "Zone 1 is for full fare first class and diamond medallion members. Zone 5 is back there." He pointed a manicured finger toward the chaotic mass of people near the restrooms. Evelyn felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. Discipline, she reminded herself. Always discipline. I don't need to check it, Evelyn said, sliding her phone onto the counter, the screen displaying a QR code with the bold letters, First Class. I'm on the manifest. Vance. Evelyn Vance. Greg didn't even look at the phone. He looked at her. Look, I don't know if you used some upgrade glitch or if you're just confused, but I can't have you clogging up the line. We have actual high-value clients arriving any minute. Please move. I am a high-value client, Evelyn said, her voice hardening, just a fraction. You're a disturbance, Greg snapped. He picked up a small placard that read, Counter Closed, and slammed it down in front of her. Go to the kiosk. If you have a valid ticket, it'll print there. If you don't, well, security is just around the corner. Evelyn stared at him. For a second, she considered calling the number saved in her phone under Harrison Sterling, the current CEO of Stratford Airways. She considered ending this man's career in 30 seconds flat. But Evelyn Vance was a scientist before she was a CEO. She liked to observe. She wanted to see just how deep the rot went. Fine, she whispered. She turned around and walked toward the kiosks. This was a test, and Greg had just failed the first question. 2 hours later, Evelyn was at the gate. She had printed her boarding pass at the kiosk, which, predictably, had flashed a gold VIP banner and offered her a complimentary concierge escort, which she had declined. She wanted to walk the path of a regular passenger. She sat in the waiting area, watching the gate agents set up. To her dismay, Greg, the man from the check-in counter, was now at the gate podium. He was laughing with a female colleague, a woman named Sarah, pointing at passengers and whispering. The boarding announcement began. We would now like to invite our first-class passengers, Diamond Medallion members, and uniformed military personnel to board at this time. Evelyn stood up. She gathered her tote bag and joined the small queue of wealthy travelers. There was an older man in a bespoke suit, a young couple dripping in Gucci, and Evelyn. As the line moved, the man in the suit glanced back at her. He offered a polite nod. He didn't care what she wore. He was rich enough to know that true wealth often dressed like it didn't care. But Greg? Greg cared. When Evelyn reached the front of the line, Greg's smile vanished instantly. His face contorted into a mask of annoyance. You again? He hissed, loud enough for the people behind her to hear. I have my boarding pass, Evelyn said, holding out the paper ticket this time. Seat 1A. Greg snatched the ticket from her hand. He stared at it, frowning. He typed something into his computer. Then he typed again, harder. This is invalid, he lied. Evelyn's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? The system rejected it, Greg said, his voice rising, performing for the audience of passengers now watching. It's flagged as fraudulent. Where did you get this? Did you print this off a third-party site? Or did you steal it? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. The couple in Gucci stepped back, eyeing Evelyn with suspicion. I purchased this ticket directly from your corporate booking line, Evelyn said, her voice turning icy. Scan it again. I'm not scanning anything, Greg said. He ripped the boarding pass in half. The sound of the paper tearing was shocking. The first-class line gasped. You just destroyed my property, Evelyn said, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from rage. I destroyed a fake ticket, Greg retorted, puffing out his chest. You are trying to board a transatlantic flight with fraudulent documents. That is a federal crime. I am doing you a favor by just kicking you out of line, instead of having you arrested. Greg, Sarah, the other agent, whispered nervously. She touched his arm. Maybe we should check the manifest manually. The name Vance. It's flagged as VIP in the system. It's a glitch, Sarah, Greg snapped at her, not lowering his voice. "Look at her. Does she look like a VIP? Does she look like she belongs in 1A? Seat 1A is reserved for diplomats and CEOs, not street people." He turned back to Evelyn, a sneer curling his lip. "You're holding up the line. I'm going to count to 3. If you aren't gone, I'm pressing the panic button." Evelyn didn't move. She stood her ground, her boots planted firmly on the airport carpet. She reached into her tote bag. "Don't reach for anything," Greg shouted, backing away and raising his hands dramatically, playing the victim. "She's got a weapon." Panic rippled through the crowd. People screamed. A mother covered her child's eyes. Evelyn slowly pulled out a sleek, black leather folder. She didn't open it yet. She just held it. "I am giving you one last chance, Greg," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Scan my digital pass, let me board, and we can pretend this never happened." "Security!" Greg screamed into his radio. "Security to gate B12. We have a hostile passenger refusing to comply." Evelyn sighed. She looked at the torn ticket on the floor. "You really shouldn't have done that," she murmured. Within minutes, 3 TSA officers and 2 airport police officers arrived on segways and on foot, surrounding the gate. The boarding process had completely halted. A crowd of nearly 200 people was now watching the spectacle. Phones were out. The red recording lights were blinking. This was going live on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. The lead officer, a burly man named Officer Miller, stepped forward, his hand resting near his belt. "What's the problem here?" Miller asked, looking between Greg and Evelyn. "She's refusing to leave the secure area," Greg said, breathless, wiping sweat from his forehead. "She presented a fraudulent ticket, she threatened me, and she reached into her bag in a threatening manner. I denied her boarding for safety reasons." Officer Miller turned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, is this true?" Evelyn looked Miller in the eye. "I presented a valid first-class ticket. This agent tore it up and accused me of fraud based solely on my appearance. I have threatened no one." "She's lying," Greg shouted. "She doesn't belong here. Look at her. She's probably high," the crowd murmured. Some were on Evelyn's side, whispering about discrimination. Others were swaying toward Greg's narrative, influenced by the uniform and the authority. "Ma'am, I need to see ID," Miller said sternly. "I tried to show him my ID," Evelyn said calmly. "He wouldn't look at it." "Show me," Miller commanded. Evelyn opened the black leather folder. Inside, there wasn't just a driver's license. There was a thick, metallic card with a holographic chip and a secondary ID badge encased in hard plastic. She handed the folder to Officer Miller. Miller took it. He looked at the driver's license first, Evelyn Vance. Then he looked at the second card. His eyes went wide. He squinted, reading the fine print. Then he looked at the metallic card. It was a black Amex Centurion, but not the standard one. It was the corporate edition issued only to heads of conglomerates with a net worth exceeding $10 billion. But it was the ID badge that made Officer Miller freeze. It was a Department of Defense clearance badge, alongside a corporate executive keycard for Vance Dynamics. Miller looked up at Evelyn. His demeanor changed instantly. The aggression melted away, replaced by confusion and a sudden, dawn-like realization that he was swimming in very deep water. "Ma'am, Dr. Vance," Miller stammered. I see. What is it?" Greg demanded, stepping forward. "Is it fake? Arrest her." Miller ignored Greg. He handed the folder back to Evelyn with 2 hands, respectful, almost reverent. "Dr. Vance, I apologize for the disturbance. There seems to be a significant misunderstanding here." "There is," Evelyn said. "But the misunderstanding isn't yours, officer. It's his." She pointed at Greg. "Officer!" Greg shrieked. "Do your job! Get this trash out of my terminal!" Suddenly, a commotion came from the jet bridge. The door flew open, and a man in a pristine navy suit stormed out, followed by 2 flight attendants. It was Harrison Sterling, the CEO of Stratford Airways. He happened to be on this flight. It was the flagship route, and he was traveling to Zurich for the acquisition meeting, the meeting with the buyer who was saving his company. He had heard the screaming from the plane. "What in God's name is going on out here?" Sterling bellowed. He was a tall man with silver hair and a face that was usually composed for Forbes covers, but now was red with irritation. "We are 20 minutes delayed. Who is holding up my plane?" Greg's face lit up. His savior had arrived. "Mr. Sterling?" Greg rushed over, pointing an accusatory finger at Evelyn. "Thank God you're here. This woman, this squatter, is refusing to leave. She's harassing staff and holding up the flight. I was just about to have her arrested." Harrison Sterling turned his gaze toward the problem. He adjusted his cufflinks, ready to deliver a scathing dress-down to this unruly passenger. He looked at the woman in the hoodie. He looked at the messy bun. He looked at the sneakers. Then he looked at her face. Harrison Sterling stopped. He stopped breathing. He stopped moving. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like he had been slapped with a bag of flour. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Greg didn't notice his boss's terror. He kept talking. "I told her, Mr. Sterling. I told her first class is for VIPs. I told her to get back to the zoo where she belongs." "Greg," Sterling whispered. It was a strangled sound. "Sir." "Shut up," Sterling croaked. "Shut up." Sterling took a shaky step forward. He looked at Evelyn Vance, the woman who held the debt of his entire company in her hands, the woman he was supposed to meet in Zurich to beg for a retention bonus. "Dr. Vance?" Sterling's voice cracked. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. A small, cold smile played on her lips. "Hello, Harrison," she said. "I think we need to have a talk about your definition of VIP." The silence that descended on gate B12 was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the lungs of everyone present. Even the ventilation system seemed to hum quieter, as if the building itself was leaning in to listen. Harrison Sterling, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers and survived congressional hearings, looked like he was about to vomit. He stood frozen, his hand half extended towards Evelyn, shaking visibly. Greg, however, was still operating on the momentum of his own arrogance. He was so deeply retrenched in his narrative that Evelyn was a vagrant, a criminal, a nobody, that his brain simply refused to process the visual data in front of him. He saw his boss terrified, but he misinterpreted the fear. He thought Sterling was afraid of the situation, of the delay, of the PR nightmare caused by this crazy woman. "Mr. Sterling, please step back," Greg said, stepping between the CEO and Evelyn, acting the role of the loyal protector. "She's manipulative. She knows your name because she probably Googled it while she was squatting in the lobby. She's a stalker." Sterling blinked. The spell of terror broke, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage directed at the man standing next to him. "Get out of my way," Sterling hissed, shoving Greg aside with a force that sent the gate agent stumbling into the podium. Greg gasped, clutching the counter to steady himself. "Sir, I was just protecting you." Sterling ignored him. He turned fully to Evelyn, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of submission that was shocking to see from a CEO. "Dr. Vance." "Evelyn, I had no idea you were on this flight. If I had known, I would have sent a car. I would have cleared the terminal. I apologize. I apologize profusely." Evelyn didn't move. She didn't accept the apology. She just stood there, clutching her leather folder, looking at Sterling with eyes that were as cold and hard as diamonds. "You didn't know I was on the flight, Harrison," Evelyn said, her voice calm but carrying to the back of the crowd, because your system is designed to ignore people who don't look like they matter. And your staff, she tilted her head toward Greg, are the enforcers of that ignorance. Greg's eyes darted between Sterling and Evelyn. The gears in his head were grinding, stripping, and sparking. Dr. Vance! Evelyn. The name clawed at his memory. He watched the news. He read the internal company memos. Vance Dynamics, the shadowed capital firm that had just bailed out Stratford Airways, the new majority shareholder. The blood left Greg's face. It didn't just drain, it vanished. His skin turned the color of wet ash. His knees, previously locked in a stance of authority, turned to water. He looked at the torn pieces of the boarding pass scattered on the floor, the boarding pass he had ripped with such glee. He had just torn up the ticket of the woman who signed his paycheck. "Mr. Sterling," Greg squeaked. It was a pathetic sound. I didn't know. She was wearing a hoodie. She didn't look like what, Greg? Sterling roared, spinning on him. The veins in Sterling's neck bulged. She didn't look like she could fire you? She didn't look like she owns 51% of this airline as of 9 o'clock this morning? The crowd gasped. The whisper ripple traveled fast. She owns the airline? That's the owner. Oh my God, he's dead. The phones were held higher. The live stream view counts were exploding. Greg stammered. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes pleading. "Ma'am, Dr. Vance, surely you understand. Security protocols. We have to be careful. I was just doing my job." "Your job," Evelyn interrupted, stepping closer to him. She wasn't shouting. She was speaking with the clinical precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. "Your job is to facilitate the transport of paying customers from point A to point B with dignity and efficiency. Your job is not to be the fashion police. Your job is not to judge the worth of a human being based on the fabric of their clothes." She pointed to the floor. "Pick it up." Greg froze. "Excuse me?" "The boarding pass," Evelyn said. "Pick it up." Greg looked at Sterling. Sterling stared back with eyes that said, "Do it or I will kill you myself." Slowly, painfully, Greg knelt. In his expensive suit, in front of 200 people, in front of the cameras, he got down on his hands and knees. He gathered the scraps of the paper he had destroyed. His hands were shaking so badly he had trouble grasping the pieces. "I'm sorry," Greg whispered to the carpet. "Louder," Evelyn said. Greg stood up, clutching the confetti of the ticket. Tears of humiliation were welling in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "Not to me," Evelyn said. She turned and gestured to the line of economy passengers behind the velvet rope, the people Greg had sneered at, the people he had ignored. "Apologize to them. To the people you treat like cattle every single day because they didn't pay for priority." Greg looked at the sea of faces. He saw anger. He saw vindication. He saw people who had been in his line before, people he had dismissed, people he had been rude to. "I'm sorry," Greg said to the crowd. "Pathetic," Evelyn muttered. She turned back to Sterling. "Harrison, this man represents the culture of your company, a culture of arrogance, elitism, and superficiality. You asked me for a retention bonus. You asked me to keep the current management team in place because you claimed you knew how to run an airline." Sterling was sweating profusely now. "Evelyn, please, let's discuss this in the lounge. Let's get you on the plane. We can sort this out privately." "No," Evelyn said. "We're going to sort it out right here." She turned to Officer Miller, who was watching the scene with a look of immense satisfaction. "Officer, am I free to go? Or is there still a question of my identity?" "Dr. Vance," Miller smiled, tipping his cap. "You are free to do whatever you damn well please. and if you need me to remove anyone for harassment." He glanced at Greg. "Just say the word." "Thank you, officer," Evelyn said. She walked over to the podium, Greg's podium. She placed her tote bag on the counter. She typed a few keys on the computer. "What are you doing?" Sterling asked, his voice trembling. "I'm logging in," Evelyn said. "I have administrator access. I want to see something." She pulled up Greg's employee file. She scrolled through the notes. Customer complaints, warnings, all flagged, all ignored by middle management because Greg hit his upsell targets. "Gregory Hines," Evelyn read aloud. 12 formal complaints in the last 6 months. Verbal abuse, racial profiling, refusal of service. She looked up at Sterling. "Why is this man still employed, Harrison? Union rules. Administrative backlog." Sterling made excuses, but they sounded hollow. "Inefficiency," Evelyn corrected. "And indifference." She turned to the computer screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Harrison," she said, "I'm not boarding this flight." "What?" Sterling looked panicked. "But the meeting in Zurich, the investors—" "I'm not flying with Stratford Airways today," Evelyn said. "Not as it stands. I don't trust the judgment of this crew. I don't trust the culture." She looked at Greg. "And I certainly don't trust the gate agent." Greg was trembling. Am I fired?" Evelyn looked at him. "Fired? Oh, Greg, that would be too easy. If I fire you, you go on unemployment. You play the victim. You tell your friends you were let go because of a misunderstanding with a difficult client." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, I'm not going to fire you." Greg let out a breath. Hope flickered in his eyes. "I'm going to promote you," Evelyn said. The silence returned. Sterling looked confused. Greg looked stunned. "Promote me?" Greg asked. "Yes," Evelyn said, "but not here." The concept of promotion hung in the air, confusing and terrifying. In the corporate world, unexpected promotions from a hostile boss usually meant one thing. You were being sent to a place where careers went to die. "I don't understand," Greg stammered, his hope warring with his suspicion. Evelyn tapped a final command into the terminal. The printer behind the desk whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet of paper. She ripped it off and slid it across the counter toward him. "Stratford Airways has a subsidiary," Evelyn began, her voice taking on a lecture hall quality. "Stratford Logistics, specifically the cargo division." Sterling closed his eyes. He knew where this was going. He winced. "Cargo?" Greg asked, his voice shrinking. I'm a customer service lead. I work with people. My skills are in client relations." "Your skills," Evelyn corrected, "are in judgment. You are very good at looking at things and deciding if they are worthy. So I'm putting that to use. We have a station in Anchorage, Alaska. It's a refueling hub for our trans-Pacific cargo freighters." "Alaska?" Greg's eyes went wide. "It's a very important role," Evelyn continued, her tone deceptively light. "You'll be the night shift supervisor for the livestock and perishable goods hold. You won't have to deal with any pesky passengers, Greg. No hoodies, no fake tickets. Just frozen fish, crates of machine parts, and the occasional transport of breeding horses." "You can't do that," Greg shouted, the reality crashing down on him. "I live here. My life is in New York. You can't just ship me to Alaska." "Actually, I can," Evelyn said, tapping the employee handbook that was sitting on the shelf behind him. "Clause 14, Section B of your contract. Management reserves the right to reassign staff to any operational hub based on the needs of the company." "The company needs you in Anchorage, Greg. Tonight." "I quit," Greg yelled. He threw his badge onto the counter. "I quit. You can't control me. I'll sue." "You can quit," Evelyn nodded, reasonable. "But if you quit, You lose your severance. You lose your vested pension. And considering I am about to launch a full internal audit of your conduct for the last 5 years, I imagine you'll be leaving with a gross misconduct flag on your file. Do you know how hard it is to get hired in the hospitality industry with a gross misconduct record, Greg? Even the motels won't touch you. Greg stared at her. He was trapped. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the power he held over others, and now he was being crushed by a power so much vast than his own that he couldn't even comprehend the scale of it. The flight to Anchorage leaves from Terminal 2 in 3 hours, Evelyn said, checking her watch. It's a cargo jump seat. No first class. Dress warm. Greg looked at Sterling, begging for intervention. Mr. Sterling. Sterling looked away. He fixed his tie. You heard the owner, Greg. Good luck with the fish. Greg stood there for a long moment. The fight drained out of him. He looked at the laughing faces in the crowd, the recording phones, the police officers who were barely suppressing their grins. He realized with a sickening thud that he was the villain in this story. And villains didn't win. Slowly, Greg reached out and took the paper. He didn't say a word. He turned around, grabbed his jacket, and walked away from the podium. He walked past the first-class line, past the economy line, and disappeared into the terminal crowd, a small, defeated figure in a blue blazer that suddenly looked too big for him. Evelyn watched him go. She felt no joy, only a grim sense of necessary maintenance, like cleaning a spill. She turned back to the crowd. The passengers were staring at her in awe. I apologize for the delay, everyone, Evelyn said, her voice projecting clearly. I know you're all tired. I know you just want to get to Zurich. She looked at the gate agents, Sarah and the others, who were standing, terrified in the corner. Sarah, is it? Evelyn asked. Sarah jumped. Yes, Dr. Vance. You tried to intervene earlier, Evelyn said. You tried to check the manifest. You tried to do the right thing, but you were overruled. I should have done more, Sarah whispered. You're in charge now, Evelyn said. Get these people boarded. And Sarah? Yes. Open the upgrades, Evelyn said. Every single passenger in economy. If there is an empty seat in business or first, fill it. Families with children first, then elderly, then veterans. No charge. A cheer erupted from the back of the terminal. It started as a ripple and turned into a roar. People were clapping, high-fiving. The tension that had plagued the gate for the last hour evaporated, replaced by a festive energy. And Mr. Sterling, Evelyn said, turning to the CEO. Yes, Evelyn? Sterling was still pale, but he was trying to regain his composure. You and I are not going to Zurich today, she said. Sterling's jaw dropped. But the meeting is cancelled. I'll reschedule it, Evelyn said. We have work to do here. We are going to your office. We are going to pull the logs for every gate agent, every manager, and every supervisor in this terminal. Greg wasn't an anomaly, Harrison. He was a symptom, and we are going to cure the disease. But my bags are on the plane, Sterling protested weakly. Have them sent to your house, Evelyn said. She picked up her tote bag. She pulled her hood back up. Come on. My car is outside. She started walking away, back the way she came. Sterling stood there for a second, looking at the luxurious first-class cabin he was supposed to be relaxing in, with its champagne and lie-flat beds. Then he looked at the woman in the sweatpants walking away, the woman who held his fate in her hands. He sighed. He grabbed his briefcase and ran after her. Coming, Dr. Vance. As they walked away, the crowd parted for them. But this time they weren't parting for a suit. They were parting for the hoodie. However, the story wasn't over. Evelyn thought she had taught a lesson. She thought she had handled it. But she didn't realize that Greg wasn't just a bad employee. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and a brother in a very dangerous place. As Evelyn exited the secure area and headed toward the pickup curb, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think you can ruin my life and walk away? You have no idea who my family is. Watch your back." Evelyn stopped. She stared at the screen. Harrison bumped into her. "Everything all right?" Evelyn looked up at the grey sky outside the sliding doors. The rain was coming down harder now. "No," she said softly. "I think the turbulence is just beginning." The rain outside Terminal 4 had turned into a deluge. Thunder rattled the glass panes of the sliding doors as Evelyn Vance and Harrison Sterling exited the building. Sterling was jittery. He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder. The text message Evelyn had received, "Watch your back," had spooked him more than it had her. "Evelyn," Sterling hissed, struggling to keep pace with her brisk walk. "Maybe we should wait for security inside. That text. Greg is unstable. I've seen him snap at catering staff over a missing turkey sandwich. If he's threatening you—" "Greg is a bully," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Bullies usually bark loud to hide the fact that they have no teeth. My car is on level 3 of the garage. It's a secure vehicle. We'll be fine." They crossed the sky bridge to the parking structure. The air here was damp and smelled of gasoline and wet concrete. It was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights buzzing intermittently. It was the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, but the garage felt abandoned, the shadows stretching long between the rows of parked SUVs and sedans. Evelyn led the way toward a matte black Range Rover parked in the corner, backed against a concrete wall. "Here," she said, reaching for her keys. Suddenly, a heavy metallic clang echoed through the garage. Sterling jumped. "What was that?" From behind a white cargo van 2 rows away, 3 figures emerged. They wore reflective safety vests, the kind worn by airport ground crew, but they weren't working. They were holding tools. One held a tire iron. Another held a heavy wrench. In the center was Greg. He was no longer wearing his blue blazer. He was in his shirt sleeves, soaked with rain, sweat, his tie loose, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "I told you," Greg shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I told you not to mess with me." Sterling gasped, backing up against the Range Rover. "Greg, have you lost your mind? Put that down." Greg stepped forward, flanked by the 2 large men. "Shut up, Harrison. You threw me to the wolves. You let her humiliate me." He pointed the tire iron at Evelyn. "And you think you can just snap your fingers and send me to Alaska? You think you can destroy my pension? My life?" "You destroyed your own life, Greg," Evelyn said. She didn't reach for a weapon. She didn't scream. She just stood by the driver's side door, her hand resting near the handle. "Who are your friends?" "This is my brother, Frank," Greg sneered, gesturing to the burly man on his left with the wrench. "And his associate. They work the ramp. They know how to handle luggage that causes problems." Frank cracked his neck. He looked at the Range Rover, then at Evelyn. "Fancy car," Frank grunted. "Greg says you got a black card in that bag, and probably a lot of cash." "This is a robbery?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I thought this was about honor, Greg." "It's about severance," Greg screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You owe me. I want your bag. I want the watch on Harrison's wrist. And I want you to unlock that phone and transfer $50,000 to an account I give you, right now, or Frank here is going to show you what happens to unruly passengers in the cargo hold." Sterling was shaking so hard he dropped his briefcase. "Greg, please. I'll give you the money. Just don't hurt us." "Harrison, be quiet," Evelyn commanded. She looked at Greg. "This is your final chance to walk away. If you take one more step, you turn a labor dispute into a felony with a mandatory minimum sentence." "I have nothing to lose," Greg roared. He lunged forward, swinging the tire iron. "Evelyn, look out!" Sterling shrieked. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't move. But the car did. The transition from the climate-controlled sterility of Terminal 4 to the parking garage was jarring. It was like stepping into the belly of a beast. The storm that had been threatening the city all morning had finally broken, and even inside the concrete structure of the Level 3 garage, the sound was deafening. Rain lashed against the open sides of the building, creating a mist that hung in the air, smelling of wet dust, gasoline and ozone. Harrison Sterling was unraveling. The polished CEO who could command a boardroom of sharks was now jumping at his own shadow. Every car door that slammed in the distance made him flinch. He clutched his briefcase to his chest as if it contained his last breath. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice echoing too loudly in the emptiness. "We should go back. We should wait for the police escort. That text. Watch your back. Greg isn't stable. I've seen the personnel files. There were anger management flags 3 years ago that HR buried." Evelyn Vance didn't slow her pace. Her sneakers squeaked softly on the oil-stained concrete. She seemed to be part of the storm, calm, inevitable, and unbothered by the noise. "Fear is a currency, Harrison," she said, her voice cutting through the damp air. "Greg is trying to spend it. If we go back inside, we validate his investment. We show him that his threats have value. I don't pay for goods I didn't order." "This isn't a negotiation," Sterling hissed, looking over his shoulder. The garage was dimly lit, half the fluorescent tubes flickering with a nervous, buzzing energy. Shadows stretched long and thin between the rows of parked SUVs. This is a man with nothing to lose. On the contrary, Evelyn stopped at Road G, looking toward the far corner where a matte black Range Rover Sentinel sat backed against the wall. He has his freedom to lose. He just doesn't know it yet. They reached the vehicle. It was a fortress on wheels, armored to B7 ballistic standards, though to the untrained eye, it just looked like an expensive SUV. Evelyn reached for the door handle. Clang. The sound was sharp and metallic, like a bell tolling. A heavy iron pipe struck one of the concrete pillars 10 feet away. Sterling yelped and scrambled backward, nearly tripping over his own expensive Italian loafers. From the shadows of a white maintenance van parked 2 spots over, 3 figures emerged. The silhouette in the center was unmistakable. It was Greg. But the Greg standing there was a deconstructed version of the man from the gate. His blue blazer was gone, his shirt was soaked with sweat and rain, and his tie hung loosely around his neck like a noose. His hair, previously gelled into submission, was wild. Flanking him were 2 men who looked like they were carved out of granite. They wore reflective airport vests, but the way they held themselves, shoulders hunched, fists clenched, spoke of bar fights and back-alley brawls, not luggage handling. One held a tire iron, the other a heavy industrial wrench. "I told you," Greg's voice was a ragged tear in the silence. "I told you I wasn't just some employee you could throw away." "Greg!" Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "Have you lost your mind? Put that down! You're making this worse." "Worse?" Greg laughed, a high, brittle sound that bounced off the low ceiling. "How does it get worse, Harrison? I'm 42 years old. You just sent me to Alaska to freeze fish. You stripped my pension. You humiliated me in front of 200 people and a live stream audience. My life is over." He took a step forward, slapping the pipe into his open palm. "You think you can just walk away? You think because you have a black card and a fancy title, you can crush people like bugs?" Evelyn turned slowly to face him. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't back away. She stood with her weight evenly distributed, her eyes scanning the two men flanking him. "I didn't crush you, Greg," Evelyn said, her tone conversational, as if they were discussing a seating chart. "I held up a mirror. You didn't like what you saw." "Shut up!" Greg screamed. He pointed the pipe at her face. "You don't get to talk anymore. You're going to listen. This is my brother, Frank." He gestured to the brute on his left. "And his friend, Mickey. They don't work for the airline. They don't care about your corporate policies." Frank stepped forward, cracking his neck. He looked at the Range Rover, then at Evelyn's tote bag. "Greg says you're loaded, lady. Says you got one of them Centurion cards. And the watch on the guy. That's a Patek, ain't it?" "This is a robbery?" Evelyn asked, raising a single eyebrow. "I thought this was about honor, Greg. I thought this was a protest against the unfair treatment of the working man. Now you're just a common thief." "It's severance!" Greg roared, spit flying from his mouth. "It's the severance package you tried to steal from me. I want the bag. I want the watch. And I want you to unlock that phone and transfer $50,000 to the account I give you, right now. Do it, and maybe you leave here without a broken jaw." Sterling was trembling so violently his teeth were chattering. "Evelyn, give it to him. Just give him the money. I'll reimburse you. Frank, right? Frank, I can wire you the money. Just please, put the weapon down." "Harrison, be quiet," Evelyn commanded. Her voice dropped an octave, losing its conversational lightness. It became cold, hard, and final. She looked at Greg. The distance between them was 15 feet. "Greg," she said, "I am going to give you one opportunity to survive this. Not survive in the sense of living, but survive as a free man. Turn around, walk away. We never speak of this." Greg stared at her. For a second, the sheer audacity of her confidence made him hesitate. But then he looked at his brother. He looked at the wreckage of his career. The shame burned too hot. "Get her," Greg whispered. Frank grinned. He raised the tire iron and lunged. "Evelyn, look out!" Sterling shrieked, covering his head. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply tapped the rear door handle of the Range Rover twice. The explosion of motion that followed was so fast that Harrison Sterling later claimed he missed it entirely. The rear door of the Range Rover didn't just open, it flew outward with hydraulic force, catching Frank mid-lunge. The heavy armored door struck the large man in the shoulder with the force of a battering ram, spinning him around and sending the tire iron clattering across the concrete. Before Frank could recover, a shadow detached itself from the vehicle's interior. Luther. Evelyn's head of personal security stood 6'5" and weighed 260 pounds of pure muscle density. He was a former Tier 1 operator, a man who had cleared rooms in hostile territories that Greg couldn't even find on a map. He moved with a terrifying silence. Luther didn't shout, "Freeze!" or "Police!" He simply grabbed Frank by the back of his vest and the belt of his pants, lifted him off the ground as if he were a toddler, and slammed him face first onto the hood of the Range Rover. The sound of air leaving Frank's lungs was sickening. Mickey, the second thug, panicked. He swung the wrench wildly at the open door. From the passenger side, Kaya emerged. Small, wiry and terrifyingly efficient, the former Mossad agent ducked under the clumsy swing. She kicked Mickey's kneecap with a surgical precision that produced a loud snap. As he buckled, she drove her elbow into his collarbone, dropping him to the floor. Before he hit the ground, she had a taser pressed against his throat. "Don't," Kaya said softly. It was over in 6 seconds. Greg stood alone. His pipe hung limply in his hand. His mouth was open. He looked at his brother, groaning on the hood of the car. He looked at Mickey, writhing on the floor. Then he looked at Luther, who was slowly turning toward him, cracking his knuckles. Greg stammered. It was a joke." "A joke?" Evelyn asked. She walked around the car, stepping over the dropped wrench. She stopped 2 feet from Greg. "Drop the pipe, Greg," she said. Greg dropped it. It clattered loudly, sealing his fate. "I didn't mean it." Greg began to sob, the adrenaline crashing, leaving only terror. "I was just angry. You ruined my life. You can't blame me for being angry." "I don't blame you for your anger," Evelyn said, her voice devoid of pity. "I blame you for your choices. You chose to judge me based on my clothes. You chose to abuse your power at the gate. And now, you chose to ambush a Department of Defense contractor and her security detail with deadly weapons." Sirens began to wail in the distance, the sharp, piercing yelp of the Port Authority police. Luther had triggered the silent panic alarm the moment the pipe hit the pillar. "Defense contractor?" Greg whispered, the color draining from his face. "Attempted kidnapping of a high-value asset." Evelyn listed the charges on her fingers. "Assault with a deadly weapon. Conspiracy to commit extortion. And since this is airport property, these are federal charges, Greg. You aren't going to a county jail. You're going to a federal penitentiary." The police cruisers came screeching up the spiral ramp, blue and red lights fracturing the gloom of the garage. Officers swarmed the scene with weapons drawn. "Get on the ground!" the officers screamed. Greg collapsed to his knees, putting his hands on his head. As the officers cuffed him, he looked up at Evelyn one last time. He wanted to see triumph in her eyes. He wanted to see a gloating billionaire. But he saw nothing. Evelyn wasn't smiling. She looked at him with the detached disinterest of a scientist observing a failed experiment. That indifference hurt more than any insult. He realized, finally, that to her, he wasn't an enemy. He was just an error in the system that she had corrected. As they dragged Greg away, kicking and screaming about his rights, Harrison Sterling peeled himself off the wall. He was hyperventilating. "You!" Harrison pointed at Luther and Kaya. "You had a paramilitary squad in your car, the whole time." "I told you, Harrison." Evelyn opened the rear door and climbed into the leather seat, pulling her hoodie up. "I transport sensitive logistics. I never travel alone." "Now get in. We have a board meeting to crash." 3 hours later, the storm had passed, leaving the New York skyline scrubbed clean and glistening. But inside the boardroom of Stratford Airways, the atmosphere was apocalyptic. The 12 members of the board sat around the mahogany table. They had been summoned urgently. The news was already playing on the wall-mounted monitors. TMZ had the cell phone footage from the gate, and CNN was running a breaking banner. "Airline assault. Stratford employee arrested in attack on billionaire owner." The door opened. Evelyn Vance walked in. She had not changed. She was still wearing the charcoal hoodie, the sweatpants, and the sneakers. Harrison Sterling followed her, looking like a man walking to the gallows. Evelyn didn't sit. She threw the leather folder, the one containing the transfer of ownership paperwork, onto the center of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn said, "we have a problem, and his name is Harrison." Harrison froze. "Me? Evelyn, I was a victim. He attacked me too." "Greg attacked us," Evelyn corrected. "But you created Greg." She projected a slide onto the screen behind her. It was a graph showing customer satisfaction scores versus employee complaints over the last 5 years. "I've spent the last hour reviewing the HR logs," Evelyn said, pacing the room. Greg Hines had 14 reported incidents of racial bias and verbal abuse. 14. "Do you know why he wasn't fired, Harrison?" Harrison stayed silent, staring at his shoes. "Because he was a high performer on upsells," Evelyn answered for him. "He was generating an extra $3,000 a month in baggage fees. So you, Harrison, signed a waiver to keep him on despite the complaints. You prioritized $3,000 over the dignity of your passengers. That is why Greg felt untouchable. That is why he felt he could attack me. Because you told him, for years, that profit matters more than people. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Effective immediately, Evelyn announced. I am restructuring the leadership of Stratford Airways. You can't fire the whole board, one member protested. Watch me, Evelyn said. But I'm not firing you yet. I'm reassigning you. She turned to Harrison. Harrison, you are stepping down as CEO today. Harrison closed his eyes. I understand. I'll have my lawyer draft the severance. No severance, Evelyn interrupted. You are remaining with the company. If you want your vested stock options, you will complete a 6-month probation period in a new role. A consultant? Harrison asked, hopefully. A gate agent, Evelyn smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Excuse me? You heard me. You are going to work the desk at JFK Terminal 4. You are going to wear the uniform. You are going to deal with the delayed flights, the angry passengers, and the broken systems you refuse to fix. You are going to learn what it feels like to be on the front line. If you survive 6 months without a single customer complaint, you get your stock. If you quit, you leave with nothing. Harrison looked at the board members. They looked away. They knew Evelyn held 51% of the shares. She was God in this room. 6 months, Harrison whispered. At the gate? Start tomorrow, Evelyn said. And Harrison, tuck your shirt in. We have standards. 1 month later. The morning sun streamed through the glass ceiling of JFK Terminal 4. The mood in the terminal had changed. The tension was gone, replaced by a strange efficiency. At Gate B12, a line of passengers was boarding the flight to Zurich. Behind the podium, a man with silver hair was typing furiously on the computer. He was wearing a Stratford Airways uniform that was slightly too tight around the shoulders. He looked exhausted. He looked humbled. Excuse me, a passenger said, an elderly woman with a confusing ticket. I think I'm in the wrong zone. Harrison Sterling looked up. The old Harrison would have sighed. He would have pointed to the kiosk. But the new Harrison, the one who had spent 4 weeks being yelled at, spat on and ignored, simply smiled. Let me help you with that, ma'am, Harrison said. We can get you sorted right here. Standing near the window, watching the scene, was a woman in a hoodie. Evelyn Vance adjusted her tote bag. She wasn't flying first class today. She had given her seat to a young soldier, trying to get home for his sister's wedding. She was flying economy, seat 34B. She watched Harrison help the woman. She saw the change. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As she boarded the plane, the flight attendant at the door, Sarah, the one who had been too afraid to speak up before, spotted her. Dr. Vance, Sarah beamed. Welcome aboard. Can I get you anything? Just a water, Sarah, Evelyn smiled. And keep an eye on the new guy at the gate. I think he's finally getting the hang of it. Evelyn walked down the aisle, past the suits in first class, past the extra legroom seats, and squeezed into the narrow seat in the back. She pulled her hood up, closed her eyes, and listened to the hum of the engines. Justice wasn't about revenge. Revenge was sending a man to jail. Justice was changing the system so that the next time a woman in a hoodie walked up to the counter, she would be seen not as a problem, but as a person. And as the plane lifted off the tarmac, soaring over the grey prison where Greg sat awaiting trial, and over the terminal where Harrison was learning humility, Evelyn Vance finally slept. In a world obsessed with optics, Greg and Harrison made the fatal mistake of confusing net worth with self-worth. They saw a hoodie and saw a target. They should have seen a warning. Evelyn Vance taught them, and the world, that true power doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need a suit, and it certainly doesn't need to bully. True power is the ability to change the world, one boarding pass at a time. The next time you're at the airport and you see someone who looks like they don't belong, remember Evelyn. Remember that the quietest person in the room might be the one who owns the building. Treat everyone with respect, not because of who they are, but because of who you are. Thank you so much for watching. If this story of karma and justice gave you chills, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a upload. What would you have done if you were Evelyn? Would you have forced Harrison to work the gate, or would you have fired him outright? Let me know in the comments below.